Hi, Michael Buffer here, and you are watching Lights Out.
This is Faisal Khan for Lights Out in association with Shamrock Boxing, and this is podcast 16 of the Lights Out Boxing podcast. Delighted to be joined by only one of the Lights Out team members, Mohsin Gulshir, aka Ron. Ron, just a duo today, like the good old days. How you doing, mate?
Oh, very good, mate.
Yeah, how you been the last few weeks since we did podcast 15? Anything different in your life?
Yeah, it seems forever ago, but yeah, not too bad. Just keeping ticking along. I was going to say I was looking forward to the gyms opening up this weekend, but that's sadly not going to happen now because of the coronavirus spike in around the surrounding areas. So,
Hashtag stay at home. But when I said there's anything new happened lately, Ron, I mean, I was just, sort of like, but anyways, yep, Liverpool are Premier League champions. The sight that nobody thought they would ever see. Great times to be alive. But
let's stick to boxing. Come on,
let's stick to boxing. But hold on, as you mentioned, current certain areas could be going back into lockdown. A bit of a shame because I know you mentioned you was looking forward to getting back into the gym. But fair play to you, man. You've covered a lot of ground doing all those miles for your campaign that you've been doing with the running. It's good to see that you've been keeping yourself busy. It's good to see that you've been keeping yourself active. And we've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, before we get started, let's remind the viewers out there, if they haven't, to make sure they hit that subscribe button and to start following us on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And let's move on with a quick fire question. For me, it's probably the best time of the podcast because you guys don't know what I'm going to ask. I don't give you guys time to do a bit of research about this question. So I'm just going to throw it out there like I always do. What is the best build-up to a fight you have seen? I'm going to go first. I had three in mind, but do you know what? I had to go with Wilder versus Fury, strictly being because they
one or two.
The first one. And Lights Out covered the first press conference that they did in London. So I was like literally just right next to him in the first press conference. And I remember when they both got up, Tyson were like, yeah, come on, let's have a little spar. And I was thinking, this is amazing. And whatever obviously transformed after that. But I just think because of how big that fight was, it was the big clash in the heavyweight division that we'd all been wanting to see. There were so many questions asked about that fight. As Tyson Fury got what it takes to get back in the ring with the big names in the division. Deontay Wilder, is he as good as he says? And of course, the mind games that the Gypsy King played with Deontay Wilder in that fight, and it was an entertaining media tour that they did. And then of course you had the fight week, very, very entertaining in Los Angeles, watching all the interviews, listening to Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield before the fight. And the fight itself, had everything. It had drama, it had thrills, it had spills, and it even had a bit of controversy. But for me, I think the best build up to a fight, because I was lucky enough to be a part of it, it has to go down for me, Wilder versus Fury 1.
Yeah, I think thinking back to that was a fight where Tyson Fury was just absolutely ruled out. Like what is he doing going into a ring after being inactive for so long? But to take a fight of that caliber, against such a dangerous opponent, the build-up was entertaining. I mean, we didn't expect anything less from Tyson Fury, considering his antics with Klitschko coming dressed up as Batman and just in your face, and he didn't leave us disappointed with that, and the fight was just as spectacular as the build-up. So I mean, sometimes that doesn't even happen. So moving on to my response, it's going to be for me Mayweather versus Ricky Hatton. It's been ages since Prince Naz, when he went over to the US and he did what he did in the US and he was a success, and it was after such a long time that we got that British fighter going over, and Ricky Hatton at the time was an undefeated fighter fighting against an undefeated Mayweather as well. And I remember that tagline, someone's always got to go.
Michael Buffer,
we had the they're walking in the one-ton underland. There's only one Ricky Hatton, and that public support. That contingent of British fans that flew over for that fight. It was, Mayweather probably thought he was fighting in the away end rather than the other way around. There was a lot of hype behind that fight. Ricky Hatton was on the verge of, if he had won that fight, he would have been the pound for pound. He would have had claim for that, and rightly so. The antics before the fight, I remember Floyd Mayweather wearing a lovely shirt. If you don't, that lovely shade of red. Not the kind of one that you're wearing right now, but it was a lovely shade of red. Just obviously torn him, obviously with Ricky Hatton being a staunch Man City fan. I remember in that press conference as well, Bernard Hopkins and Calzaghe had a scuffle. So that kind of added a little bit more of a drama and a twist to it as well. The fight itself, 10th round TKO for Mayweather, but there was a lot of respect at the end. Yeah. So 100%. That for me, definitely. I mean, there's lots of other claims there, but for me, I'm going to go for that one.
No, I agree with you, man. It was the build up to that was brilliant. I remember the Hatton fan base in the press conferences singing all those Hatton songs. One thing I've always said about Ricky Hatton, great fighter, very talented in the ring. Achieved what he did, but for me, had the best fan base possible that a British boxer could possibly have.
They're loyal.
Yeah, 100%.
They were just hardcore, and even to the end of his last fight, they were still there, kind of singing his name, and he's still adored. When he's cornering Tyson Fury and all these other fighters that he's got. But brilliant ambassador for British boxing.
100%. And you know what? For any young fighter out there that's up and coming, I mean, of course, achieving world titles is one thing, but if they can grow a fan base like that, it says a lot about them. And that's one thing you've got to give Ricky Hatton a lot of respect for. He had a terrific fan base. But two great build-ups, Hatton Mayweather and Fury versus Wilder. And again, you've got the Brits versus the Americans sort of tagline in that as well. And hopefully plenty more of those Brits versus Americans later to come. Right, well, let's move on. I mean, we'll get into the podcast now. It's been announced for September the 12th, Los Angeles. No, it's not Fury Wilder 3. No, it's not Canelo versus Saunders, Callum Smith, Golovkin. It's none of those. It's the one fight that I can't believe that I'm even going to announce. Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. Now, we have to rewind back, I think, to podcast, was it 12 or 11? The tagline was, do we want to see Tyson versus Holyfield 3? You and Asif were against it. Now the question I have to bring to you, do you want to see Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr.? And whether you do or not, doesn't really matter because you're going to see it. It's been announced September the 12th in Los Angeles. Ron, your thoughts?
It came out of nowhere. I mean, I was all getting myself ready up for the, against Holyfield. From what I understand, it's going to be an exhibition fight. It's going to be an 8-rounder. I would have loved to have seen that fight in the 90s where, he was moving up the, weight division, Roy Jones Jr., and, he was just blitzing every opposition. He was the best pound-for-pound fighter. Speed, agility, unorthodox, low hands down. Tyson was just blasting opponents out there, with his kind of peekaboo style. I would have loved to have seen it then. But, Roy Jones Jr., for me, he stayed too long in boxing. But what do they both have to prove? Why are they stepping into a ring? That's a question mark that some people may ask. They're old. What kind of fighters will they be? But both have kept themselves in good shape. We know Roy Jones Jr. is involved with Chris Eubank Jr., which is training him. I mean, we've seen the video montages that Lights Out has been putting up, and we've seen videos that have been put up elsewhere as well of Mike Tyson in training him. He's looking phenomenal, but how much does that really tell us, about their genuine fitness? They might look good in short spurts, but can they do that over 3 minutes times 8?
Look, I mean, At the when it was announced that Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield were originally looking to make a comeback into boxing, I was all for it. I wanted to see it. And then as, the weeks went on, it kind of like, went quiet. And then I was thinking to myself, probably it's not going to happen. But this, for me, is not the ideal fight a 54-year-old Mike Tyson wants to make a comeback in. I mean,
I don't think it's more of a comeback. It's just...
you've seen, he's been offered millions and millions of dollars by rugby players to have a fight, by UFC stars to have a fight. I personally would have liked to have seen him done it with an Evander Holyfield, who's been at the ring for quite some time as well, who's the same same age as Tyson. I would have liked to have seen that, but
How old is Roy Jones?
Yeah, he's 51. He's 51 years old, and Roy Jones Jr. fought 2 years ago. The last time he fought was 2 years ago. Roy Jones Jr. for me is obviously has got the upper hand. I mean, I'm not even going to go to buy what they've achieved in their career, because they were both phenomenal figures in the boxing world. You speak to people about Mike Tyson, it was a natural born killer. And when you speak to people about Roy Jones Jr., they say he's probably one of the best fighters ever because of what he achieved. Which other fighter went from the middleweight division all the way up to the heavyweight division and won world titles in all those divisions? The thing that really worries me about this is Roy Jones Jr., as you mentioned, has been training Chris Eubank Jr., and his last fight was 2 years ago. He's been staying in shape. I think he's going to have the upper hand going into this fight, but I just want to make something clear. They're not doing this because they need the money. They're not doing this because they want to stay they want to keep their names, they want to keep the legacy going. Because these guys have built a massive legacy. As I said, they're not doing it for the money. These guys I'm going to tell you why they're going to do it now. This is something I feel very passionate about, yeah? These guys are doing it because this is all they know. If you ask Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. to go out and do a normal, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday job, they'd struggle big time. If you ask them to do something else or play a different sport, they'd struggle to do it. Boxing is all they know. Yeah, as I mentioned, Roy Jones Jr. is training Chris Eubank Jr. right now. Mike Tyson is doing very well with his YouTube channel, Hot Boxing with Mike Tyson, and he does a few other bits as well with social media. But
he's involved with the cannabis as well. I mean, he's got his own weed farm. Yeah, I mean, they're both very successful.
Exactly, but who are we to turn around and say you're too old, you shouldn't be doing this? This is what they know. This is, this was life for them. This was an everyday thing for them. And I believe, as boxing fans, at a time in their life when they were going through their careers, we would call for them to fight as often as possible. We'd be saying, you should fight this guy, you should fight that guy. So because they're at a certain age limit now, who are we to turn around and say you shouldn't be fighting? If this is what they want to do, as boxing fans, we should respect it and we should support it. But again, like many people are saying, someone could get really hurt. Let's remember one thing. Nobody's putting a gun to these guys' heads and saying, you have to get into the ring. If this is like, I'm going to use Rocky Balboa. When he wanted to make a comeback, he said to Paulie, there's a beast inside him.
Mason the Line Dixon. That was
Antonio Tarver, yes. And I mean, Rocky turned around and said, there's still a beast inside of me and I need to get rid of it. There's maybe a beast inside Mike Tyson. There's probably still a beast inside Roy Jones Jr. So let's give these guys a bit of credit and let's embrace it, because the chances are they'll have this fight and then that's it. They won't ever fight again. The chances, I hate to say it, I could personally see one of them picking up an injury in the build-up to this fight, because it happened with Nigel Benn. I think the intensity of a training camp at their age will be too much. But if they can get through that training camp, if they can get all through that training, bring it on. Let's see what happens.
You know what? I'm old enough to have said I've seen a Mike Tyson fight, not physically there, but I've seen him fighting live. I mean, a lot of these millennials, all they've got to go on by is these YouTube videos of Mike Tyson and Roy Jones, and this gives them another opportunity to see them fighting, live. That's something that's a positive out of that. And two greats in the ring, kind of battling it out. I mean, age has caught up with them. I remember Roy Jones Jr. towards the end of his career, he was just, he was suffering some, sickening kind of knockouts. I remember him being stopped, losing against Enzo Macronelli. I was thinking, no, please don't. You're kind of losing your legacy here. You're kind of tarnishing your name. But he just said, I can't help it. It is an itch that I need to be involved in boxing. I need to be in that ring. And people were begging him, probably his close family members said, no, enough's enough. Your health comes first. Mike Tyson's been out of the ring for a far longer time. I agree. I think out of the two, I would say Roy Jones Jr. is the favourite going into that fight. Just because he's more involved in the boxing side of it. He's obviously Roy Jones Jr. is a fantastic boxing analyst. Love him. Love his kind of inputs and insights into kind of fights. So maybe that will come into play as well, when he comes and fights Mike Tyson.
I want to obviously go back to what I was saying about we need to sort of just get on board and let's just see what happens. Look, we're all sports fans, boxing, football, cricket, tennis, and the last thing you want to see is someone get hurt. But this is a sport, not a sport for the weak in heart. And these two guys are going to get it on, and they're both at a certain age limit. And we never got to see it when they were both up and coming stars. You mentioned you wanted to see it in the late 90s. I would have loved to have seen it as well. But there's just so much negativity surrounding it. Look, at the end of the day, why aren't people getting behind this? I understand there's risks these guys are taking, but this is their decision at the end of the day. The likelihood is this fight will happen, and I think it will probably last 4 rounds. I think it'll be a slow affair. I can't see Mike Tyson being the old Mike Tyson because, as you said, all the videos we've uploaded on Lights Out on the YouTube channel of him training, can he do that in 8 for a sustained
period of time? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So and Roy Jones,
it looks great for 30 seconds. It looks great. It looks fantastic.
But how's he going to look for 24 minutes if it does go the distance? Roy Jones Jr. Yes, he's been training Chris Eubank Jr. and everything, but it's a lot different when you're under the lights and you've got thousands of people around you screaming for you. People are tuning in to buy that pay-per-view.
Interesting. Let's see. We'll see what the COVID situation is come September the 12th. Was that going to be behind closed doors? So that's another.
Well, one thing I'm hearing is that
maybe they might put it on Fight Island with the UFC fights. It's going to actually. Talking of that, it's going to be. There's another
Canelo's
fight that's
penciled in to fight that night as well.
Ooh. I think Logan Paul's fighting that night as well on that same undercard as a Tyson, and he's fighting as some ex NBA player. I don't know if you heard about that.
Well,
so it's gonna be,
Badu Jack's one of his closest friends in his team uploaded the picture as well of the Tyson Roy Jones Jr. and the caption was "Wait till you see what the undercard is." So. Maybe Badu Jack might be appearing on that, but I think one good thing that could possibly come out of this is a good undercard. It's pay-per-view as well. Thank God Asif's not joined this podcast because we'd be debating that all day long. But look, man, let them do what they need to do. Let them go out and let them have that one final hurrah.
What I'm looking forward to, what I'm hearing is that it's going to be MMA versus, boxing crossover, like that kind of fights. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be interesting. We've been on this channel, we've discussed it. Mm-hmm. Can MMA fighters, are they good? Can they be good boxers, and vice versa?
I wouldn't mind seeing Paulie Malignaggi versus Conor McGregor on this undercard. But
I'd pay to watch that. Yeah,
Ron. As everything when we talk about a fight that's been announced, we have to give a prediction as well. What's your prediction for this fight?
Roy Jones, just because he's younger, he's been involved with boxing and training. He's fought more recently. Tyson's been out of the ring for God knows. I can't even remember his last fight. Is it Kevin McBride?
Kevin McBride, 2005.
We know how that one finished off. And that was. Yeah. So I'm going for Roy Jones.
I'm going to go for Roy Jones Jr. as well. I'm going to go for a 3rd round knockout. I'm not going to. I feel bad betting against Mike Tyson, but I mean, Tyson's last fight 2005, Roy Jones Jr. last fight 2018, and I'm just doing that because of based on who's been the more active fighter. But listen, fair play to them both, man. If this is what they want to do, if this is the way they want to go out, we've supported these guys growing up. You know, we've embraced staying up till early hours in the morning in the UK. Let's get behind these two guys. And you know what? It could be an absolute brawl. It could be an absolute stinker. I, for one, am not going to miss it. And I'm going to give credit where it's due. Good luck to them both, man. As for the pay-per-view thing, well, let's not get started. We'll move on. The WBO Welterweight Champion Terence Crawford has still not been able to find an opponent. Bob Arum, his promoter, is still looking for an opponent. We understand the top two choices are number one, Yordenis Ugas, and number two, Showtime Sean Porter. Bob Arum did an interview with Chris Mannix a couple of weeks ago and said Crawford's asking for more money for an empty arena fight. Other choices for an opponent as well are none other than the WBA Welterweight Champion Manny Pacquiao, the IBF and WBC Welterweight Champion Errol Spence Jr. You look at those names I've just mentioned, you know, the other current champions in this division, they would be the ideal fights, but because of this whole COVID thing and being behind closed doors, I don't see them fights happening. I think the Pacquiao, Spence and Crawford fights, they can't be behind closed doors, so we're going to have to wait some time to see those fights. Other potential opponents are Kell Brook, as well, who's interested in the fight, and then there's a possibility of the champions at 140, the super lightweight division, Jose Ramirez and Josh Taylor could also be offered this fight. Ron, I just want to ask you something. What's your take on Crawford asking for more money for an empty arena fight? First of all, before we get into discussing who the next opponent should be.
Well, it's simple. You know, boxers, you know, their lifespan is very short. So that doesn't concern him. You know, he still wants his money. You know, he's a premier fighter. He's a pound for pound fighter. You know, and we discussed on this channel before. If they're not fighting, they don't get paid. And these promotional companies like Show, you know, and these broadcasting companies, they're making millions. So he just wants his piece of the pie. So, you know, all for it. But, you know, there's another way as well. You've got to compromise to some degree as well that, hey, mate, look, there is no spectators coming in. I don't know how much. I mean, in America, these stadiums are not that big as the UK. Mm-hmm. I mean, what do we get? 25,000, 30,000, if that. So you do need to take that into consideration.
I think, you know, when you look, when you talk about it, I mean, I think to ask for more money for an empty arena fight doesn't really sit well with me. I know Terence Crawford is one of the biggest faces in boxing. He's one of the pound-for-pound kings right now, and some people have him as the best fighter in the current 147 division. But, you know, we spoke about, in a couple of podcasts ago, we spoke about the big fighters sort of setting an example right now. Asid mentioned that some of the fighters should potentially say, do you know what, these fighters ain't getting paid. I'm earning millions for my fight. I could contribute to some of the younger fighters getting a bit more of a bigger payday. But again, listen, at the end of the day,
but they're not obliged to do that. I mean, like footballers, you know, there's empty stadiums, but they're like, no, we'll still want our salaries, or whatever it is.
But Ron, you got to look at it this point of view. I mean, at the end of the day, football's football, boxing is boxing. These guys, regardless whether they get
are putting their lives on the line. Exactly. There's a bigger sacrifice. Yeah. So 100%. Why should they? You know, lower. You know, these promoters are obviously trying to make the most money out of them. You know, these fighters.
I just think right
now
there needs to be a bit of loyalty in the sport. I don't think nobody out there should be asking for a bigger payday for empty arena fights, but that's obviously the money side of it. I don't want to focus too much in it because Terence Crawford's one of my favourite fighters. A lot of respect for him. I love what he's achieved. I love watching him as a fighter. The opponent, that's a really baffling thing right now. Yes, COVID is playing his part, but I understand, you know, not fighting without the fans is not appealing to some of these fighters. But we just finished the summer series of the top ranked shows. The 15 shows are completely finished. They finished the other night. I watched every show. The shows were brilliant. Okay, so you've not heard of some of the names. Well, learn from that. When these fighters are into the mid stages of their career, you're going to know who these fighters are by watching these shows. I mean, there was a fighter the other night, Edgar Berlanga, I think his name was. 14 fights, 14 wins, all coming in the first round. 14 knockouts in the first round. You're going to know who he is because 2 of his fights were on Top Rank. If these fights were not on Top Rank and these fights were not behind closed doors and they weren't getting shown broadcast on TV and you've seen him fight in a live arena fight, you wouldn't know who he is. But what these shows have done is they've given an opportunity for these fighters that might not have the biggest following on social media or might not get a chance again to fight on live television. But what these shows have done is they've given that opportunity to these fighters.
Given them a platform, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and one thing I've really, really enjoyed about the Bob Arum shows is seeing some of the talent that's come through. Bob Arum's got some fantastic talent that's come through. He's got a good heavyweight, Jared Henderson. There's a Guido Villanova as well. There's some great fighters to look at, and there's fighters that I'm really looking forward to seeing step up as well in the next couple of months of their career. But, again, it's not appealing, but listen, the show must go on. As for a potential opponent, I'm understanding Ugas and Sean Porter are the 2 favourites right now, jointly 2 favourites. Me personally, again, Pacquiao, Spence, them fights have to be, with spectators. They're too big not to be behind. They're too big to be behind without the fans. I would love to see Sean Porter get the fight. Sean Porter, for me, proved in his last fight against Spence, he's still got what he takes. His come forward approach is probably the best in that division. He's an absolute wrecking machine. If anyone does not rate Sean Porter, they need to go out there and just watch how this guy fights. If it wasn't for that knockdown against Spence, I had it up until that point as probably a draw. But I think Sean Porter, for me, this is more appealing. And no disrespect to you guys, I just think if anyone deserves a crack at the world title again to become a 3-time world champion, it's Showtime, Sean Porter.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you that the Pacquiao fight, the Errol Spence fight, is just too big to do it in a behind closed doors. I mean, you've got possibly Keith Thurman. If you want to throw that into the mix, he might take that. Take that fight because obviously after his last fight against Pacquiao, he's probably licking his wounds and wants a way back into that that welterweight division. Kell Brook's an interesting name. I mean, I'm hearing reports that he's looking good at 147. I was hearing that he's going to go up 1 to 154, but he's coming back down again. So that's another fight, and Kell Brook would take that. He'd give him another opportunity to have a crack at a world title. So I wouldn't rule those 2 potential fights out either.
Obviously, another name that we never mentioned was Danny Garcia. Apparently, he's going to be the next opponent for Errol Spence Jr. But I just want to touch on this topic because, as I mentioned, Jose Ramirez, Josh Taylor, the guys that hold all the marbles in the super lightweight division. Now, when I heard Max Kellerman say that the fight could potentially be offered to one of those 2, I kind of was totally against it straight away because it reminds me of Mikey Garcia's situation when he stepped up against Errol Spence. He took that massive leap up, and they were just 2 worlds apart. I mean, I think looking back on that, I think Mikey Garcia maybe should have taken 1 or 2 fights out welterweight. But what I don't want to see is the hard work of Jose Ramirez and Josh Taylor go down the toilet because they feel as if they have to step up and take this fight with Terence Crawford. I mean, Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez, for me, they're going to have to obviously have a mandatory defense. And then they should really look to be getting that all undisputed clash. And then once one of them becomes an undisputed, you know what? Step up and at 147 and take on these fighters. But just, I don't want to see them take that leap too soon and then, just get...
I mean, baby steps. I mean, you're going against the elite here. These are pound for pound fighters. Do I think Josh Taylor is a great fighter? Absolutely. Do I think he's got the making of being a potential pound for pound top 10. And that fight against Regis Prograis, that was a great fight. Fight of the year potentially. Some people might argue, but it's going 0 to 60. I would take maybe a lesser known opponent in the welterweight division. Feel that way because he's a smaller guy, and it's a different proposition when you're getting hit against bigger guys, and when you're used to kind of fighting at people who are 7 pounds lighter.
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely agree with you.
Do you know what I was thinking the other day? Because obviously Josh Taylor's going to step up to 147. I mean, whether
that's where the money's at. That's where that's where all the sexy fights are taking place.
Whether he gets crowned at an undisputed champion or not, he will. For me, he's going to step up. Would a fight with Amir Khan not make sense? You know, old line versus young line. You know, they both were world champions at super lightweight. Why not? I mean, it's an all British clash. It's a great fight. I mean, I'd love to see it. You know, you got.
I'd love to, but Amir Khan would probably think he's too hungry, and you know, Amir Khan's just I don't know what he's trying to do with his career, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's trying to rebuild, if he's after another payday, or he's just taking these fights. I mean, that last fight against Billy Dibb, you know, what did he gain out of that? You know, what was, you know, he's not relevant in the welterweight division, which is sad because he's an exciting fighter. You know, when we talk about the welterweights, none of us mention Amir Khan in that conversation. So I think it's a dangerous fight for him to take. I mean, I think it's a great matchup. I mean, someone said Amir Khan versus Josh Kelly. Could that be, you know, that could be...
I mean, again, you know,
or Josh Kelly versus, you know, Josh Taylor, you know?
I think with Josh Kelly, you know, he's Amir Khan...
Or Conor Benn as well?
Well, again,
name?
Josh Kelly and Conor Benn, I mean, they're great prospects in boxing. They have a good career so far, but...
I mean, that could be a Josh Taylor fight, potentially. There you go.
Amir Khan and Josh Taylor will only want the big names. And I'm pretty sure Josh Taylor and Conor Benn will obviously become big names at some point in the welterweight division. But, I mean, at the end of the day, if Amir Khan and Josh Taylor are going to fight someone, it's got to be a big name, and it's, you know, they've got to bring something to the table. And at the moment, I think, you know, you got Josh Kelly, who's going for that European title against Avanesian. And there's lots of talks about Conor Benn looking to take on Florian Marku and Ashley Thea Payne. So, you know, at the end of the day, like we mentioned, baby steps, you know. But I would really, listen, Amir Khan, Josh Taylor, why not? I mean, again, it's an all-British clash.
Hashtag at the end of this video, and let's see if we get much following of that.
I'll run a poll.
But we'll take a little cut out of that, you know, as you suggested it. We'll take a...
You know, I've always
make that fight.
Well, as long as my face gets put on the poster as they're doing like the face off, I think I'll be more than happy with it. But yeah, so you say Sean Porter for the Terence Crawford fight?
He's deserving of it because he's a tough son of a bitch, man. Sean Porter. He's always giving a great account of himself. You know, whenever he stepped up, and he's never been outclassed. You know, he's lost against the big names, you know, in that division. So there's nothing lost there, no dignity lost there. So I'm a big Porter fan. You know, Kell Brook he's lost against Errol Spence. I can't remember the other fight he's lost.
I remember when in 2017 I was in Sheffield when Spence fought Brook, and I met Sean Porter. I was lucky enough to get a photograph with him, and you know, I didn't ask him what he thought about Kell Brook because they fought a few years before that fight. But I remember when I asked him about what was his take on Errol Spence, he goes, "Great fighter, but I'm going to whip the son of a bitch's ass when I get him in the ring." And you know, he's got that smile about him, but he's a machine, man. And I think right now, if there's one fight that you have to be on your A game, that you've got to be physically fit, and you know for a fact you're going to go to war, it's that guy right there, Showtime Sean Porter. So I'd love to see Porter versus Crawford next. Ron, let's move on again. More news broke to us as well. Callum Smith has been offered $5 million to fight Canelo Alvarez. Now, again, I just want to touch on something. Canelo Alvarez has not fought since his last fight was against Sergey Kovalev. Okay, this is a guy that struggled to find an opponent lately. We understand Billy Joe Saunders ruled himself out of the fight due to financial reasons and not having enough time. That's fine. As I mentioned, not fought since Sergey Kovalev, yeah? Callum Smith hasn't fought either since John Ryder. Regardless of what you think of the decision, he's more active than Canelo is in terms of, you know, who's had the final, who's fought before. That's of course was Callum Smith. You look at Canelo right now. He's one of the biggest names in boxing. Why has he struggled to get an opponent? And let's not even say COVID has had its part to play. You know, let's not even say it's the thought of fighting Canelo without the fans there. I mean, just how many fighters have come out in the last few weeks and said, you know, give me $1 million, I'd fight Canelo tomorrow if I had to. Why is the situation with Canelo dragged on so long? And do you think Callum Smith is getting more than he would have originally have been offered if it wasn't for the fact that they've not found an opponent?
I don't know. I mean, Canelo is he's a cash cow. He is the face of boxing. I'm surprised, you know. I thought when Billy Joe Saunders was offered that fight, I thought he'd be, rather than him, you know, kind of umming and ahhing about it, I thought he'd be like, where do I sign? You know, he's a true gypsy. You know, gypsies, they fight. You know, they'll fight on a drop of a hat. As you know, Tyson Fury's a proud gypsy, and he's that there. You know,
anytime, any place, anywhere.
So I mean, I'm shocked at that.
I'll fight any man born from his mother.
But why he didn't take it, I don't know. I don't know why they're struggling, because I think, you know, they're going to be careful as well as his matchmakers that they don't, you know, they were going to, if it wasn't for COVID, he was going to fight in Japan against a really unheard of opponent who didn't pose any sort of threat. That name doesn't come to me who I'm talking about. But in all honesty, I can't answer that question. But, you know, I'd love to see that fight with Callum Smith happening. Am I going to read into it that he hasn't fought since Kovalev? No. You know, Canelo's 30 years old. You know, he's in his prime.
But inactivity, though, Ron, it plays its part.
Yeah,
this is a big
but he's
fight,
probably kept himself ticking over. You know, he looks like a good professional. You know, look, we can see Canelo has moved massively on from that defeat to Mayweather. You know, his style is everything. His attributes have all definitely stepped up. He's learned from that defeat, and that's been showing in his last few fights. You know, he's had 2 wars with Triple G. Some people are saying Triple G. Some people say Canelo won that fight. You know, that's another conversation for another day. He's had a fight. You know, he's gone to light heavyweight to fight
Kovalev,
and you know, he came out victorious there. What's stopping this guy? You know, he's a beast. So, you know, he's the elite. He's a pound for pounder as well. You know, he's got claim to be potentially number 1.
I mean, you know,
so I don't think it's going to have an impact.
I mean, Crawford struggling to find an opponent. Okay, fair enough. But Canelo, you know, the biggest face in boxing right now. Yes, again, behind closed doors, not without the fans. You know, not that appealing, but still, at the end of the day, this is a chance to fight one of boxing's best right now. You know, I don't know. I think they've just sort of like outpriced every other fighter that, you know, they've made offers to. You know, you potentially could have looked at Benavidez for this fight, a Caleb Plant for this fight. You know, you could have even gone for a third fight with Triple G, which obviously is going to happen. But again, we're not talking about just a normal. We're not just talking about anybody. We're talking about Mundo, Callum Smith. You know, winner of the World Boxing Super Series. You know, the guy that dethroned George Groves. You know, beat Rocky Fielding, a great fighter. Wasn't as convincing in his last fight, but don't want to look too much into that. Callum Smith, for me, right now is fighting Canelo at the best time, because there's no pressure on Callum Smith to win this fight. Callum Smith loses this fight, he could rebuild again. Because the reason why I say that is because when you fight Canelo right now, it's almost as if you are expected to lose. Not because you're not a good boxer, it's because Canelo, for me, is probably the best fighter in the world right now. And to fight Canelo, there's only one way you beat Canelo, that's by knocking him out. And I don't see nobody knocking Canelo out right now. Go to a point.
He's got a great chin on him. I mean, I don't think he's been dropped throughout his career, has he?
No.
Even with that Canelo, you know, the Triple G, that was a wall of a fight, but neither of them dropped.
I remember watching an interview. John Rawlins did an interview with IFL TV. Shout out to IFL TV. And I can't remember which one of the guys it was down at IFL TV. Great bunch of guys, all of them done an interview. John Rawling, and there's at the time when Billy Joe Saunders was the favourite for the Canelo fight, and John Rawling said, I mean, forget knocking Canelo out. How many rounds does a fighter actually have to win to get a points decision against Canelo in Vegas, in America? I would say at least 10 rounds they have to win. Because you've got to remember one thing. He's a cash cow boxing. He's the biggest face in boxing. And he's always going to get a judge's decision. So for me, Callum Smith's going to go into this fight thinking, do you know what? The likelihood is whether I can put in the greatest performance of my life here and I could still probably get robbed of a decision. I mean, Callum Smith should be going into this fight to think, do you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to absolutely try and knock this guy's head off. Probably won't happen. But I just think this fight comes at the right time for Callum Smith because there's less pressure. Everyone's expecting him to lose. Everyone's expecting Canelo to like sort of just walk through him. Do you think the way this fight is setting up, bear in mind that's if Callum Smith does take this fight, do you think Callum Smith has a chance because of he's under less pressure going into this fight?
Yeah, I mean, possibly you could put it that way. But, I have high hopes for Callum Smith, Why not he, he's a taller fighter, he's a rangy fighter, he's got good technique. That knockout against George Groves, he should not be underestimated whatsoever. So, yeah, I mean, I fancy him. Do I see him being the favourite? Probably not. But Callum Smith, like you said, loses this. It's not the end of the world. He can come back. Will Canelo move up in weight again? And relinquish those titles? Let's know. We don't know, but he's got nothing to lose in this. Gain what, 5 or 6 million out of this fight. So,
especially what's been going on around the world with this whole coronavirus pandemic. But no, listen, man. I mean, at the end of the day, if he loses, it's not the end of the world. I, for one, would love to see the clash with Billy Joe Saunders.
I mean, where are they thinking of that taking place September the 12th then? In the UK?
Well, that's when they were looking to put Canelo out in the ring next. I don't think it would be in the UK. I think it would be in America. But because of obviously, I mean, you think about it this way. If you're going to have Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. that same night, are people going to pay for 2 pay-per-view events? Regardless of how DAZN come into this, I'm not too sure. I don't know. I'm not really checked the full details of this, of DAZN's new offer to the UK fans. But it is exciting times. And I personally do think Callum Smith will take the fight. I think he has to. I think he should take this fight because there's less pressure on him to win. I mean, he could go in there, lose this fight, and still put in a good performance. And then, one thing I think about Callum Smith, and no disrespect to Callum Smith, anyone who knows me will know that I'm a big Callum Smith fan, but I just don't think the elite fighters give him that respect that he deserves. I never hear the Golovkins or the Caleb Plants or the Benavides or the Charlos or the Andrades talk about him, in a certain way. And I think this fight helps him grow massively, helps his name grow massively. And listen, with a good performance, I think it opens up doors for him. But move on, Ron. Showtime Boxing returns. They, again, announced some magnificent fights for their sort of summer series. Starts on August the 1st, but we're going to talk about a few of the fights. David Benavides fighting on August the 15th against Alexis Angulo, defending that WBC Super-Middleweight title. Again, another fight that Canelo could have possibly looked at. Both the Charlos are out as well on September the 26th. Jamal fighting Sergey Devryanchenko, and then the Jamel fighting Jason Rosario. So they both will be defending their world titles. But the one fight that stood out, October the 24th, for the WBA Super-Featherweight title, Tank Gervonta Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz.
I like that. I like that fight. Yeah, that's tasty. And, I mean, Leo Santa Cruz, that's going to be, he's a classy operator. I mean, the fight he had with Frampton, those back-to-back fights, they're one apiece, so there's potentially a third fight there. But, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that lightweight division. So, he's kind of moved down.
Tank's coming down, yeah. Let's bear in mind.
Yeah, he's coming down, and I found out. Yeah, I mean, we talked about Garcia being fighting with who am I talking about again? British fighter, former Olympian, Hull. Who am I talking about? Garcia's fighting. It's just been, they've just kind of. Anyway, so yeah, Garcia's fighting that. Then you got Devin Haney, who's going to fight the winner of that.
Ryan Garcia,
then
Luke Campbell, yeah.
Luke
Sorry,
Campbell, spoke
about it last time.
Yeah. So yeah, and then we've got Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez. So I was surprised not to hear that name, him in that mix, but it's good to see he's getting a good fight equally against. That I'm really looking forward to that against Leo Santa Cruz, because I think he's a credible opponent. It'll be a good test for him. So I'm looking for. That's definitely being penciled into my diary.
They say there's a lot of talent with Tank, and they as well say that there's not a big name on his CV right now. I mean, looking at his CV right now, I mean, he beat Gamboa, Jose Pedraza. I mean, I remember when he beat Liam Walsh, the build-up to that was brilliant, man. Honestly, just watching Mayweather, go back and forth with the Walsh brothers. But this fight with Leo Santa Cruz, yes, we speak very highly about the lightweight division, but we mentioned those big six names that we mentioned in the last podcast, because he's not going to get a Devin Haney or a Ryan Garcia or Teofimo Lopez or Vasyl Lomachenko. I personally think he's made the right choice by going back down to super featherweight and taking on Leo Santa Cruz and winning the world title again in that division. I don't think he'll stick to that division though. But as you mentioned, Leo Santa Cruz, 37 wins, 19 knockouts, 1 draw, 1 defeat. You mentioned the fight with Carl Frampton, 1 apiece. We're not just talking about any sort of fight. We're talking about Leo Santa Cruz. He's a real powerhouse. He's a great fighter as well. This is the type of test that Tank needs. What do you think Tank's got to do to win this fight?
He's going to do what he's been doing throughout his career. I think he wants to make a statement. I think he'd be looking to, kind of put on a great performance by stopping Leo Santa Cruz. That will show, kind of send a message to, it depends if he wants to stay in the, super featherweight division, or, even the lightweights would be like thinking, okay, this is a guy that's not been mentioned, in these circles as much, but yet this is someone else we've got to watch out for as well. So a good big performance, if he stops Leo Santa Cruz, that definitely makes a statement.
Tank's 25 years old, Leo Santa Cruz is 31, and every time I speak about fights in boxing, and when I always say that, listen, don't look at the mid-30s type of fighter and think, yeah, he's old and he's done. I always say one thing about fighters that are in the mid-30s, experience. They've been around the block. They've got rounds under their belt. They know the sport inside out. And I think this is a different kettle of fish that Gervonta Davis is getting in the ring with. But he's 25 years old, 23 wins, 22 knockouts. I think this is now, these next 18 months to 2 years is where this guy has to kick on, because you speak to anybody in boxing, they will tell you Tank's a phenomenal talent. He's super duper talented. He's got everything in his in his arsenal to really go on and become a top fighter. And I look at why he's fighting Leo Santa Cruz right now. I think he was sort of offended not to be thrown in the mix for the Lomachenkos and the Teofimo Lopez's, the Ryan Garcias and the Devin Haney's and the Luke Campbells. I think he's slightly offended that he's not been thrown in any of those fights. So for me, a win in this fight really, really does get the other guys up at lightweight on notice.
Yeah, I agree. He's highly rated. He's a Mayweather fighter as well. That's something that we don't talk about as much now, because obviously he's fallen out with Mayweather, hasn't he? Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's still under the Mayweather promotional company. I was hearing that Eddie Hearn's trying to get in there to sign him up, so that kind of speaks volume about him. Yeah, he's not the most biggest talker outside of the ring. He just does it inside the ring. That's what he's all about, and I admire that about him. And his record speaks for itself, where he's had 23 fights and 22 knockouts. Mm-hmm. So he's doing something right there. But the one thing that he's lacking is that big name. But you can say the same thing about Devin Haney. You can say the same thing about Ryan Garcia. Their resumes are much better than Tank's. So I guess it just depends on who's promoting you. Who's making you relevant. Haney, Haney's quite a bit of a poster boy. Same with like Ryan Garcia, and social media and whatsoever. So they get that attention, they get that limelight, and then they get put forward for these fights and mentioned in these circles. So that's something that he needs. I think with Tank, he needs to resolve that. Who is representing him. Maybe they're not. He needs to kind of consider, are they doing a good enough job? But he's got himself a big fight. So let's see. If he wins that, comes through that convincingly with a knockout, sky's the limit.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I just look at it and I think it opens doors for him in that lightweight division. And then some of the fighters up there in that division will probably think, okay, it's another face, it's another name that we've got to deal with. Because as you mentioned, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, and this kid did the future of this sport. And again, I will tell you now, Leo Santa Cruz, it's not an easy fight, but it's a fight that we look forward to. And again, as we do when we announce any fight, we have to give a prediction. I'm going to go for a Gervonta Tank Davis split decision win.
I'm going to go for more of a convincing win. I think it's going to be a late stoppage for Tank. I think this is going to be his time to shine. He's going to show the boxing world, actually, I'm a big name. Mayweather's kind of really hyped him up as a potential pound-for-pound boxer. Believe it or not, people forget that he was co-headlining that Mayweather and Conor McGregor fight. People completely forgot about that. I know you're laughing now, but there's hype there, but I don't think it's unjustified. I think there's, I've seen a lot of his fights, and I love his style. He's got that ferocity.
That's who Mayweather fought. That's what Mayweather fought. Well, listen, we'll just pin an episode strictly on Mayweather versus McGregor. No, look, it's good to see, man. Like I said, COVID's not helped. Some big fights are getting put on hold. But again, reading that Tank versus Santa Cruz, the Charlos as well, Benavidez, there's a lot to look forward to. Okay, so you say a late stoppage. I'm going to go for a split decision win. Ron, anything else you want to add?
Just recent boxing news. I think there was a boxer who recently did a big no-no in these, this day and age with the use of social media, kind of saying things, inappropriate things that you shouldn't be saying. I thought boxers would learn from, the example of Billy Joe Saunders, who received a ban and he's been given a £15,000 fine for his controversial comments about domestic violence, despite the good that he did, he was doing during the coronavirus period. This boxer in particular made kind of homophobic and transphobic kind of comments. I just think it's a massive letdown. You're seen as professionals, and rightly so. Really happy to see that his promotional company kind of has wiped the slate clean. Not slate clean, sorry. They've kind of wiped. They said no more to him, and they kind of dismissed him from his contract. So, so that's the other boxing news. Other than that,
one thing I will say about that is, listen, people, the way they choose to live their life is entirely up to them. Whatever they're comfortable with, whatever makes them happy. Let's remember one thing, we're all one. We're all human beings at the end of the day. Let's respect people's beliefs, and whatever makes people happy, let's let them live their lives the way they feel comfortable. There's no room for it in the sport. There's no room for it in this whole world, full stop. So, well done to the promotional company of this boxer that just completely said no, and that's it. You know, you're on your own now, and you know, hopefully it'll stop other fighters as well. I mean, Billy Joe Saunders did a terrible thing, but he wasn't talking about what this guy was talking about. What he did was not right, but hopefully it's a learning curve for Billy Joe Saunders. But yeah, again, you know, homosexuality, stuff like that, you know, again, you know, just there's no space for it. There's no room for it. And I think, you know, the last couple of months, I think, you know, massive credit to everyone, not just in football, but in all the other sports, how they've really taken to this whole Black Lives Matter situation. It's nice to see, again, it's not going to get rid of racism anywhere in the world, but it's just nice to see that we're
raising awareness.
We're raising awareness, and we've taken that extra step. Do I feel, you know, we could be doing more? Yeah, 100%, of course, man. I mean, there's so much more we could do, but again, you know, baby steps, and hopefully, you know, the kneeling down before the start of every game, you know, it continues. You know, I don't want to see it stopped. I think it's something that it should be not just in football, but every other sport as well. So listen, massive shout out to everyone that's taking part in it. And again, it's something we support as well. Black Lives Matter. You know, we're totally against racism. You know, it is just no room for it in this world whatsoever. So my apologies for not even mentioning what you just brought up on. So fair play to you, mate. But yeah, that's obviously all we've got time for on podcast 16. Mohsin, my man, Mohsin Gulshit, aka Ron, thank you very much for your time. A pleasure as always, mate. Guys, don't forget to give Ron a follow on Instagram. The links are going to be below in the description. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And please follow us on all these social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Post us some dream fights. Post us anything you'd like for us to bring up in one of our podcasts. You know, we're always open up to brand new ideas. That's all we've got time for. Thank you, everyone, to listen for podcast 16 of the Lights Out Boxing Podcast.